Look at this photograph. 9 young women standing in formation, mid-1950s based on the clothing and photographic style. They're wearing matching athletic uniforms, white sweaters with emblems or text on the front, shorts, knee-high socks, athletic shoes. Each woman is holding a hockey stick. They're arranged in 2 rows, 5 in the back, 4 in the front. Standard team photo formation. Behind them, a white building with windows, shrubs and vegetation on either side, natural outdoor lighting. Their expressions are confident. Some are smiling. Others look serious, composed. This is clearly a team photograph, formal, deliberate, taken to document something specific. You can see the pride in their postures, the way they hold their sticks, the coordination of their uniforms. These women were athletes, and they were good enough, organized enough, successful enough that someone thought it was worth taking their photograph. But here's what you won't find: their names, their record that season, where they played, who they competed against, whether they won championships, what happened to them after this photograph was taken. Every face in this image is clearly visible, but none of them are searchable. In the 1940s and 50s, team photographs served specific purposes. For men's sports, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, these photographs were meticulously documented. They appeared in yearbooks with full rosters, in local newspapers with game recaps and player statistics, in school archives with dates, locations, coaches' names, season records. The photographs weren't just mementos, they were part of a larger documentation system that preserved athletic achievement as institutional history. But women's sports? The photographs existed, the system around them often didn't. Women's teams were photographed, sometimes for yearbooks, sometimes for local publicity, sometimes just because someone thought it was worth recording. But those photographs rarely received the same archival treatment as men's teams. No detailed captions, no player rosters, no statistics preserved alongside the image. Just Women's Hockey Team, 1953, or sometimes not even that. This specific photograph exists in at least one archival collection. The label reads, Hockey Camp, 1953. That's it. No location, no institution name, no list of participants. Just a year and a generic descriptor. Now, compare that to how men's sports teams from the same era were archived. You'd typically find full team roster with names, coach and assistant coach listed, season record, championships or tournaments won, sometimes even individual player statistics. The photograph would be one piece of a larger documentary package. But for this women's team, the photograph is all that remains. And the photograph alone tells you almost nothing beyond what you can see.
This wasn't accidental neglect, it was systematic deprioritization. In the mid-20th century, women's athletics occupied a strange space institutionally. They existed, there were teams, leagues, competitions, but they weren't considered important enough to document with the same rigor as men's sports. Several factors contributed to this. Limited institutional support. Women's teams often operated with minimal budgets, volunteer coaches, and borrowed facilities. Record-keeping was seen as an unnecessary expense. Social attitudes about women's athletics. Sports were considered character-building and culturally significant for boys and men. For girls and women, they were seen as recreational at best, unfeminine at worst. Media disinterest. Local newspapers covered men's high school and college sports extensively. Women's sports rarely received coverage beyond a brief mention, if that. Archival priorities. When schools and organizations decided what to preserve for posterity, women's sports materials were often deemed not historically significant. The result? Photographs like this one survive, but the context around them, the names, the achievements, the stories, doesn't. Look at what they're wearing. The sweaters aren't generic. Some have visible text or emblems. One clearly reads something like long jump or a similar phrase, indicating this might be affiliated with a specific camp, school, or organization. The uniforms are matching, which suggests institutional backing of some kind. This wasn't a casual pickup game. This was organized athletics. The women have proper equipment, regulation hockey sticks, appropriate footwear, athletic socks. Someone invested in this team. Someone thought it mattered enough to provide uniforms and equipment. Someone arranged for a photographer to document them. But that same institutional infrastructure that supported the team while it existed didn't preserve its history. The team was real. The record of it barely is. But here's what we know. This photograph was taken in 1953. It shows a women's hockey team, likely at a camp, school, or organized league. The women appear to be teenagers or young adults. They're confident, equipped, and organized. Here's what we don't know. Their names. The name of the camp, school, or organization. The specific location. Their win-loss record. Whether they competed in tournaments. Who coached them? What happened to any of them afterward? You can search for men's hockey teams from 1953 and find detailed records, rosters, statistics, newspaper clippings, championship results. But this team? It exists in archival limbo. Photographed, but not remembered. Visible, but not traceable.
If you're starting to notice a pattern in how history treats women differently, hit that like button. We're going deeper. In the mid-20th century, athletic achievement for men was documented through multiple overlapping systems. School yearbooks published full team rosters with player names and positions. Newspapers ran seasonal recaps, player profiles, and championship coverage. Athletic associations maintained statistics, tournament brackets, and historical records. All of these systems reinforced each other. A player photographed for the yearbook would also appear in newspaper coverage, which would be cited in future alumni publications. The documentation was redundant, and that redundancy ensured preservation. But women's teams rarely benefited from this redundancy. Maybe they'd appear in a yearbook, but without names. Maybe they'd get a newspaper mention, but just local women's team with no roster. Maybe the school kept some records, but they were later discarded as not essential. Without multiple systems reinforcing each other, preservation depended on luck. And luck wasn't on their side. Look at their expressions again. These aren't women who were apologetic about playing sports. They're not trying to look delicate or non-threatening. They're standing like athletes. Shoulders back, hockey sticks held confidently, direct eye contact with the camera. Some are smiling, genuine, proud smiles. Others look serious, focused, the way athletes look when they're being documented as competitors. These women knew they were good at what they did, and they expected to be remembered. If you're starting to notice a pattern in how history treats women differently, hit that like button. We're going deeper. In the mid-20th century, athletic achievement for men was documented through multiple overlapping systems. School yearbooks published full team rosters with player names and positions. Newspapers ran seasonal recaps, player profiles, and championship coverage. Athletic associations maintained statistics, tournament brackets, and historical records. All of these systems reinforced each other. A player photographed for the yearbook would also appear in newspaper coverage, which would be cited in future alumni publications. The documentation was redundant, and that redundancy ensured preservation. But women's teams rarely benefited from this redundancy. Maybe they'd appear in a yearbook, but without names. Maybe they'd get a newspaper mention, but just local women's team with no roster. Maybe the school kept some records, but they were later discarded as not essential. Without multiple systems reinforcing each other, preservation depended on luck. And luck wasn't on their side. Look at their expressions again. These aren't women who were apologetic about playing sports. They're not trying to look delicate or non-threatening. They're standing like athletes. Shoulders back, hockey sticks held confidently, direct eye contact with the camera. Some are smiling, genuine, proud smiles. Others look serious, focused, the way athletes look when they're being documented as competitors. These women knew they were good at what they did, and they expected to be remembered for it. Why else pose for a formal team photograph? Why else wear uniforms with pride? Why else hold your equipment like it matters? They participated in the ritual of athletic documentation, the team photo, the formal arrangement, the permanent record. But the system failed to complete the ritual. The photograph was taken. The names were never attached. When athletic achievement isn't documented, it doesn't just disappear from history, it disappears from the present. These women presumably went on to live full lives. Some might have married, had children, built careers. Decades later, those children or grandchildren might have stumbled across this photograph, maybe in a family album, maybe in an archive, and they'd have no way to prove that the woman in the photo was their grandmother. No roster to reference, no newspaper clipping to confirm, just a photograph of anonymous athletes. The achievement becomes untraceable, not because it didn't happen, but because the systems that documented men's achievements simply didn't exist or didn't bother for women.
But here's the most frustrating part. The archive label mentions Hockey Camp 1953. That means there was an institution, a camp with a name, a location, staff, probably some organizational records. Somewhere, at some point, there was a document that listed these women's names, a registration form, an attendance sheet, a camp newsletter. But that document is either lost or filed separately from this photograph. And without names, the photograph can't lead you to the records. And without the photograph attached to the records, if they still exist, can't tell you what these women looked like or how they stood together as a team. The two pieces of documentation are severed, and both are rendered incomplete. Still here? That means this matters to you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next forgotten photograph. 9 women. Hockey sticks. Matching uniforms. 1953. When you first looked at this, you might have seen a simple team photo. Athletes at a camp. A moment preserved. But now you see women whose athletic achievement was considered disposable, who were photographed because someone thought it was worth recording, but not worth remembering, who participated in a system that documented men's sports exhaustively, but treated women's sports as ephemeral. The photograph shows confidence, the archive shows indifference, and the gap between those two things, that's where these women's names disappeared. When institutions decide what's worth preserving, they're making claims about whose achievements matter. In the 1950s, men's sports achievements were considered historically significant. Women's sports achievements were not. That wasn't a neutral decision, it was a value judgment. And the consequences of that judgment are permanent. These women competed, they trained, they won games, probably. But their wins don't count in the historical record. Not because they didn't happen, but because no one thought they were important enough to write down.
This is the 6th photograph in this series. Each one shows people who were documented, but not completely, not in ways that allowed them to be remembered fully. We've seen someone erased from census records, children used as reform evidence without names, people cataloged as colonial specimens, relationships sanitized by archives, children photographed without context, and now athletes whose achievements were considered temporary. Different systems, different mechanisms, same result. People whose presence was captured, but whose significance was denied. I can't tell you who these women were. I can't tell you if they won championships. I can't tell you where this camp was or who ran it. I can't tell you if any of them went on to coach, to play professionally, to pass their love of sports on to their daughters. I can't tell you if they're still alive, if they remember this photograph being taken, if they ever tried to find it in an archive. What I can tell you is this: they were athletes. They were good enough to be photographed as a team, and the system that documented their male peers extensively barely bothered with them. 9 women, 1 photograph, 0 names. Their achievement stopped at the shutter click. History moved on without them. Not because they didn't matter, but because the people keeping records decided they didn't. If this made you think differently about whose stories get preserved, share it. Someone needs to see this.
This series examines real historical photographs to uncover whose achievements were considered worth remembering and whose weren't. Next time, another photograph, another system, another group of people who deserved better than archival silence. Subscribe. This pattern is bigger than you think.